Well, I want to get to your poetry book that you just released this year, but I kind of wanted to start at the beginning and get a feel for how you entered the writing world. Are there any other writers in your family? Like, take me through how you found out about writing. Were you just really into English class as a kid or something?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Like, I was pretty late to the game, I'd say. I grew up with a Kerouac enthusiast of a dad. Huge on literature, really enjoyed Steinbeck and Hemingway, Kerouac, all the misogynistic writers of our era. And then my sister was definitely a voracious reader, but I was kind of the oddball, I was like the black wolf of the family. I kind of picked it up late, and I wrestled through all of high school, actually. So I didn't have much time for, I guess, my academic passions. But then it wasn't until about my senior year of high school. I had just transferred back from a very dedicated all-boys Catholic school. Or not all boys, it's both. So I wrestled for like all of high school, which was quite the event. It was definitely a canon event in my life. And so I transferred out of that school because I underwent some really terrible experiences through that sport. And I kind of needed a place to put that, I guess, emotional toll that I underwent from, cutting weight and kind of basically trying to survive while also being 15, 16, 17 and, competing at this really high level. So I transferred back to my old school. I quit wrestling. I dropped my college offers. I did all that because I was done. I couldn't stand it. And then I entered this class called Writer's Workshop. And there is a teacher named Darren Samakowski. And Writer's Workshop was basically a spoken word poetry class. And I really had no idea what I was getting into. I really just wanted to take the easiest English class possible because I was so done with just having a hard time in high school. And then all of a sudden, I was given my first assignment to write an honest poem. And it was basically a mimication of Rudy Francisco's honest poem, which is this really huge spoken word poet. And I just all of a sudden had these metaphors just started falling out of me, and I was just full of these similes and all these words, and I didn't really understand what place they came from, but I felt like I had a pipeline straight to the page. So I just started writing, and I realized I just loved it so much. And my dad and my sister always really loved to write, and I guess I always loved to write, but I kept it so quiet because my thing was always wrestling, and I was more of the athlete. But yeah, it was this strange thing where suddenly I realized I had this, I guess, sort of knack for it, and not just knack for the writing part, but I really love to perform. I've always kind of been that person who likes to get up in front of the class. So yeah, all of a sudden Samakowski introduces me to spoken word poetry, and I'm kind of shot out of this literary canon, and I'm just like, oh my God. I start picking up tons of poetry books and all these novels, and I just become basically completely obsessed. And then in the past, I guess, 5 years now, I've kind of taken it and flown with it. So yeah, I guess
I was wondering how you got into the spoken word part, because that's nerve-wracking for a lot of people. I've never been able to do that. An element of it for you is performing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think anything should be written unless you could speak it honestly first. I think that's where I get kind of my more like raw spirited prose style. I mean, I've started to drift into more like rigid form and stuff like that. I've got really obsessed with like, sonnets and sestinas and guzzles and whatnot. But aside from that, I kind of try to break that whole like literary guideline we're given in the beginning of our lives. I think spoken word is the best way to do it too, because through like these oral traditions, I think it really like just makes your writing better if you speak it first. Like, I'll write a poem, and when I write the line, I'll say it. Before I write the line, I say it out loud so that I can feel the way I want to write it, if I want to add words or whatever. So I think spoken word should be a huge aspect to everyone's writing, because it has been for me, I don't know.
Yeah, it's much more confrontational. It kind of forces you to deal with your own words and the way you feel about things. And you're right, if you can't say it out loud, do you really mean it?
Exactly.
You mentioned like Bukowski, Mary Oliver, Ocean Vuong, Sylvia Plath, like all the classics in your TikToks. Is there a specific book or an author that you've been hooked on recently?
Let me think. Yeah, I've been really obsessed with this poet. She's actually the poet laureate of the United States right now. Her name's Ada Limon.
I am obsessed with her too.
I am absolutely obsessed with her. God, she's incredible. I just read The Hurting Kind, and I just read Sharks in the Rivers, and I read Bright Dead Things, and I literally just can't get enough. I'm hoping to God that there's more to read, because she is just an absolute master of words. It's ridiculous.
I am literally sitting next to my copy of Bright Dead Thing, so I understand what you mean.
Yeah. Oh my God.
What do you think makes a great poetry book? Because, like you said, there's a set of guidelines that were given at the beginning, and certain things are understandable because we have to understand each other linguistically, like language-wise. But beyond that, it's such a personal thing. What do you look for in the poetry that you read?
Yeah, to make a good poetry book, for me, it's always just kind of an anthology of every part of our lives. So like how you see Mary Oliver's Devotions being this anthology of all her poetry books over the years, I feel like in a very condensed version of that, I always like to write basically over the course of a year, and then I go back into those things and I edit them and I rip through them and I tear my teeth into them. Like Belly, my latest book, is broken down into 3 parts. It's broken down into a love section, into kind of this familial bellyful section, and the last one's gonna be like this eating body section. I think what makes it good is you kind of get this full emotional spectrum of the writer. So like in Adelie Moan's The Hurting Kind, we kind of get a lot of stuff involving the emotional connection human to human, and the emotional connection human to nature, and then the emotional connection human to just God in general. I think I really enjoy when you kind of get this big, broad band of things. Some books talk about only one thing. Like I'm thinking maybe my next book will be strictly on the male body and eating disorders and whatnot. But through that, I still want to give the full emotional spectrum, I guess, if that makes sense.
Have you found reading to be helpful in your process of writing? Because I've found that the more of other people's work that I read, the more words my brain has access to at any given time. But there's some writers who just don't want like any trace of other people's material, subconsciously influencing theirs. Do you read a lot when you're writing, or do you try to avoid that so it's, just plainly coming from you?
Yeah, I read like crazy. I think good artists write and great artists steal. I think that's like a famous line. I'll literally have like a lot of times when I'm writing like a longer piece that I really care about, I have like 5 books next to me. I'll just, read a few poems here and there, and from this one and from that one and from that book. And then eventually I kind of get these big like clouds of ways to like conduct my sentence. So like I sometimes even learn this thing from Sam McCoskey, my high school English teacher. Like in Rudy Francisco's Honest poem, I like learned this mimication process. It doesn't make you steal, but it helps you get your own thoughts down, where like he starts his poem with, I'm 5'6", I'm 180 pounds, I like giving big hugs or whatever. So I start my poem, I'm 5'5", I'm 120 pounds, and then I write my metaphor, my poetic line there. And then like I don't even necessarily use that, but because I had that framework, I kind of got that last line out, which really helps me. And then I'll kind of take that line and do something else with it. So yeah, reading is a huge part in, I think, making anyone's writing better. I understand, like my girlfriend, she weirdly likes to have no trace, but she's more of a songwriter. She kind of has no trace of things, but then like, I guess it's the music that she listens to that I think subconsciously always bleeds into your work, whether you like it or not.
That's interesting. Yeah. I usually interview musicians, and they usually don't like to listen to things when they're writing, so that makes total sense because I think it's easier to have that bleed into your work. Do you ever get writer's block? Is that a thing for you, or is it kind of just always flowing?
Constantly. I may like appear prolific online, but I definitely have my droughts. Weirdly enough, though, something that cures my drought the most is actually putting on like a strictly ambient, musical, no lyrics album. So I'll play like Brian Eno, or I'll play Dylan Henner. These are like ambient artists where it's just basically overlays of birds and samples and stuff, and it really gets me to like kind of relax and let all this artistic, jargon come out of me, which is really helpful, weirdly enough, because I think most poets, like I don't know how most poets function, but I love listening. It helps me so much. I put on just one album and it goes forever, and it's like eternal, and I just can write. It helps me like crazy. Yes, I get writer's block, but my way to cure it is by
Brian Eno.
or listening to just an album in a similar vein like that can just kind of get me to ponder things. I don't know why, but it just works so well.
I'm gonna have to try that. I have never tried that. Well, I mean, I listen to regular albums, but that makes sense that instrumentals would be more helpful. Yeah. On to your newest book, Belly. How did you decide on the cover image and the title?
Yeah, I was raised Catholic. My upbringing was definitely rooted in faith, and now that I've kind of branched off from Catholicism, I still find myself coming back to a lot of the core values in it, like gratitude and, loving something above. I'd say I'm more of like a Catholic Buddhist now. The story behind this photo is I had my first communion in like a few weeks, and my mom wanted photos for it because she was going to throw like a little first communion party. So my mom wakes me and my sister up at literally like the crack of dawn, and she's like, all right, we're going to the beach. It's fucking freezing cold. I'm like, I don't want to fucking do this. But I get on my little suit. I'm like, I don't know how old I am. And I think, God, I gotta be like, 7 or something? It's the funniest shit because my mom's so corny. She's literally tells my sister, you can see my sister in the background holding up this cross. It's freezing cold in the fog at the beach, and then there's me in my little suit. But, from a poetic standpoint, it just makes so much sense for my book, because I think literally the first poem of this book is I want to nail my hands to your hips like they're a cross. And it's kind of surrounding this idea that I'm religiously in love. And then it goes on throughout the entire book. There's this motif of like, I'd say I write with a lot of like biblical notes in it. Like there's always the kind of reference to God and the cross and, kind of all these different things like that. So this photo holds a lot of emotional weight for me because it was a very strange part of my life, While it's also kind of hilarious, it also has this eerie, like, emotional summation where it's like, this is a time when my parents were getting divorced, which I write a lot about in this book, and this was a time where I kind of was understanding faith, which, even though I'm not necessarily, like, Catholic at all, it definitely has been a thing in my life. And then it just made sense because it was just such a pivotal point in my life, so I thought it'd be perfect.
You have this slideshow on TikTok, and it's a bunch of the poems from the book, and it says, "Are you religiously in love? Read these." And one of the poems in the book, Sacred, there's a line that reads, "I promise to make this bed a church, one where God weeps from simply watching us," which is like one of my favorite lines in the book. I think it's so brilliant.
Oh, God.
And I wanted to ask you about that because it's a bit of a double entendre there. There's like the purest spiritual sense where love, sex, devotion, religion, like they all come from the same energetic place, and tapping into any of those things is cause for celebration. And then there's the convoluted modern religious lens through which God weeps in disapproval. How did you settle upon, like you said, faith, religion? Why was that an important thing for you to talk about?
Yeah, I think it was just such a huge aspect of my life. My grandma's kind of always shoved Catholicism down our throats. And maybe not in a negative way because I'm thankful for it now, but I go through my periods of hating God and loving God. But through all of that, I think I still have this profound love for the word God, not for God, but for the word God, because I am definitely very spiritual. I don't know. I think it's hard to kind of ignore these divine encounters we have in our life, just in the fact that I'm talking to you right now about my poetry because I manifested myself to be like this writer, and for some reason it's worked. And I think my books are always kind of an ode to that divine thing that's kind of working. It's like this undercurrent, like everything in my life is a river and it's constantly moving through me. God's constantly pushing through me. God's constantly beneath. God's constantly above. It's like always this idea that you're kind of surrounded by this spiritual, lightful aura. And I think that's a really important reason. It's a really big reason why I ended my book with, "Without a body, there's no more suffering. He looked just like God." And that line means the world to me because I have this idea that maybe it's not like the Catholic God, but like we all have, if we are all created by some higher being, then we ourselves are like these fragments of God. And being these fragments of God, it's like we are our own gods, and we are, all kind of like these walking gods. So it's just, I don't know. I think whether it be Catholicism or Buddhism or whatever, it's just really important to all my writing because I was raised with it, because I can feel it, and because I honestly need it at times when I'm not doing well or when I am doing really well. So yeah.
Another one of my favorite poems in it is called Cape, and the last lines read, "He hopes for the same sweet dreams that he just promised before kissing us goodnight." You write something in the same vein about your mother, about how like we see our parents as these, omniscient beings when we're young, as these infallible people, and then at some point the veil is broken and we realize that they're just as scared as we are. Why did you choose family as another concept for this book?
God, it was a very fucking weird year for me. My dad's flaws were held to the damn light, I swear to God. I considered my father a hero for basically my entire life, and I never understood so many reasons why so many certain things were happening. And then suddenly I was kind of hit like a bullet in the side of my neck. That's what it felt like. Like I became painfully aware of my father's missteps and his fuck-ups and the places where he went wrong. And for a long time before that, I realized it with my mom, because I think that I was kind of really aware of these things from a very young age. So in both of them, this year has been me kind of scrutinizing every piece of like their personality, because I'm just like, who the fuck are you? Like, I have these conversations with my parents, and I'm late to the bloom. I mean, I'm 21 years old, and most kids figure this out by like 15, and they hate their parents. But I've had the strongest, most beautiful, most best friend-like relationship with my dad and with my mom as well, up until like these past 2 years, where I suddenly became so aware. And I think it was almost like a public service announcement, where I was like, I kind of wanted to write about it in hopes that people would read it and reach out to me and be like, listen, I've gone through the same exact thing, because that's what I kind of was looking for. I was kind of looking for like this camaraderie, where I was like, yeah, we all kind of have it, just like you said, and I'm sure you felt the same with your parents, where it's like, I love my dad, I love my mom, but they are just humans, and whether I can forgive them or not, that is the truth. And yes, they're doing the best they can, and yes, they've really fucked up in places, but in the end, they are my parents, so I have to love them. But I'm still honestly in that process of forgiving and understanding and kind of figuring out who these people who have raised me are. So that was just a massive part. I honestly wanted this part of the book to be bigger, but I realized that so many people like the love poems that I had to make it a little more about that. But maybe in the next book it'll be more.
What is the most important life lesson that writing has taught you?
Oh, man. Let's think. God, it's done a lot of things for me, but I think it comes back to that point that I made earlier about something that's so cathartic. Like, I can really just empty myself. And obviously through my writing, I talk so much about the body, and that's why my book is named Belly, because everything centers around these bodies that we wear. And I think writing has largely taught me that at the forefront of my mind is constantly my body, whether as a spiritual thing or as a painful thing or as a beautiful thing or as a burden. Writing has taught me that I definitely have some things to work through regarding my main point in all my work, which is the body. I think it's also taught me that, like I said, you really got to find that place where you can let things release. This is massive for me, because before, like through wrestling and all these horrible experiences, I definitely bottled things up. But when I found writing, I could kind of let my shoulders down and kind of let things be, because I was writing. I also learned that writing, most importantly, reminds you of the human experience. I think everybody has this main theme in their writing, and the theme is constantly changing as you grow older. But obviously, you understand yourself so much better through it. So that's a massive thing that it's taught me.
You were talking about people's reactions to your writing and how, the resonance that comes with it. Where does your creative satisfaction come from? Does it come from the process of getting these experiences down, or does it come from hearing people's reactions to them?
Oh God, it'd have to be an accumulation of both. I can't lie and say that it's always been for myself. I've definitely fallen in the trap of writing for other people, which was a terrible point in my TikTok career, where I was just kind of pumping out all these shit poems because I knew people would react to them well. But now I'm coming back to a place where it's fully for me. I think my satisfaction comes from, and I think every writer can agree, you're kind of aware when you've written some good shit. You're like, oh fuck, that's a good one. And I get really satisfied when I finally fully crafted a poem. So I'd say my satisfaction comes from, for myself, writing a good piece. But I'd be lying if I said I don't like the affirmation from people who read my work. It blows my mind still that I'm even doing this interview, that anyone would even want to hear what I have to say. So that alone is just so special, and I'm just eternally grateful for it. It's definitely a huge part. I really enjoy that people love my work. It's just so crazy to me, but yeah.
You're talking about how people love your love poems, and in a way, you are kind of still writing for somebody else when you write a love poem, because it's kind of like this gift, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
How has that helped your relationship? How has that helped you as a person? Why do you write about love?
Yeah, for a while I couldn't write shit about love. I mean, I couldn't stand love poems. And if they were love poems, that meant they were hate poems because the love that I was receiving was hate. But now I've fallen in love. About a year ago, I fell so in love. I don't know if you know the artist Quinny.
I totally do. And I didn't put two and two together. And then I was like, no, she sings Touch Tank. I love that song so much. So I know that's like the most basic thing to say, but yeah.
Yeah, so that's my girlfriend. And
Uh-huh.
we're both writers. And I think it's just both of our ways how we express our love to each other, kind of through these, like, that medium of writing. I don't know. It just felt easy to write about her. It's definitely helped the relationship, that's for damn sure, because I think anybody loves to receive a love poem. Because when she sends me one, I get all giddy and I kick my feet. It's so awesome. But it's this weird thing. I have this theory where I hate when someone writes a book believing they're, like, the chosen one, I guess, where they're kind of, like, writing these prophetic things where it's like, oh, I, like, feel as if I know and I'm wise and I know all these things about life. Where I can't say that I don't do that, but my way of kind of, like, humanizing it and not kind of putting myself above the people who read my work is making it about myself. So, like, if I'm writing about God and him witnessing our love, I'm not going to write, like, as if I am God, or I'm not going to write the word we. Instead, I'm going to write the word I, where I want to make it about myself, but then people can kind of put themselves in my shoes. Because it's hard to write a love poem without being like, oh, my love is so much greater than the other people's relationships around me, which isn't what I want at all. I want everybody to be able to be in my shoes because, you know, I'm no better than anybody else. I have my flaws and I have ugly points of love and good points of love. So that's a really important thing in writing about love. Write about love because I'm in love. And the moment I'm not in love, which I hope will be never, I won't write about love and I'll write about something else.
Is there anything else, just lastly, in the works that you want to shout out, or just places people can find you, things you want to promote?
Hopefully, and I'm praying that my next book won't be a poetry book and instead it will be an actual fully formed novel.
Interesting.
I want to get into fiction.
That's very cool. That's a cool pivot to make.
Yeah, it's tough. So look out for that, and hopefully I'll be having some readings through the winter because I think poetry readings are made for the winter.